Last time we talked about how to multiply and divide fractions. Today we're going to be talking about adding and subtracting fractions. Now before we get into actually adding and subtracting fractions, we're going to take a look at this first example. Now in each of these, if you were asked to find x, how would you do it? Well, you might say, look at the denominator and look what I'm multiplying the denominator by, and I'm going to do the same thing to the numerator. So for this first one, we multiply by 5 to get 25, so I'm going to multiply the top by 5 as well, and that will give me 15. We can do the same for the other two as well. So to get from the 7 to the 14, I have to multiply by 2, so I'm going to multiply the top by 2 as well, and that gives me 8. Let's do the same thing on the last one here. 9 times 4 gives me 36, so multiply the numerator by 4 as well, and that gives me 8. So these are what we call equivalent fractions. So 3/5 is equivalent to 15 over 25, 4/7 to 8/14, and 2/9 to 8/36. Now, there are two different instances in which you will be adding and subtracting fractions. In the first case is when you have fractions with a common denominator. If you have a common denominator, this is the easier case, and you will simply add or subtract the numerators. You're going to keep the same denominator. Don't add or subtract anything in the denominator. When you're done, simplify if necessary. So let's go ahead and look at some examples. So we have 5/7 plus 1/7. You're going to add the numerators and keep the denominator. So this would be 6 over 7. All right, the next one we have 2/3 plus 1/3. That's going to equal 3 over 3. Simplifying that, that's equal to 1. So our answer here is 1. Next, we have 9/11 minus 2/11. So again, subtract just the numerators, and that gives us 7. Keep the denominator, so we have 11 in the denominator. And that is as simplified as it can be. All right, and the last one here, we have 5/6 minus 1/6. 5 minus 1 is equal to 4. Keep the denominator, so we have 4 over 6, which is equal to 2/3. So simplify that down. Okay, now let's talk about adding and subtracting fractions when you have different denominators. So the first thing you're going to need to do is you're going to need to find the least common denominator. We can also call that the LCD. This is the smallest number that both denominators will go into evenly. So it's going to be a larger number than the denominators that you have, but both numbers can go into that number evenly. So once you have that least common denominator, then you can change each fraction to an equivalent fraction with the new common denominator. That way, your fractions now have the same denominator, and then you can do the same process as before. Add or subtract the numerators, keep the denominators, and then simplify if necessary. All right, so let's take a look at example 3. 2/3 plus 1/4. So first thing you notice is that these have different denominators. So we have to write equivalent fractions that have the same denominator. So first, let's determine what the least common denominator is. So between 3 and 4, our least common denominator, our smallest number that both 3 and 4 will go evenly into, is 12. So I know I'm going to write both fractions with a denominator of 12. Now let's do the same thing that we were doing in that very first example. So in order to get 12, I'm multiplying this 3 by 4. So that means I have to multiply the numerator by 4 as well. And that's going to give me 8. Next, look at the second fraction, and we ask ourselves, what do I multiply that 4 by in order to get 12? I'm multiplying by 3. All right, so now I'm going to have to multiply the numerator by 3 as well, and that's going to give me 3 in the numerator. So now I have the same denominator, and now I can add these two fractions by adding the numerators and keeping the denominator. So that's going to be 11 over 12. All right, in this next one, we have 18 and 12 in the denominator. So we have to determine what is the least common denominator. What is the smallest number that both 18 and 12 will go into evenly? An easy way to do this is to take the largest number and start finding multiples of that number and seeing if those numbers will also be multiples of 12. Alright, so start with 18. 12 does not go into 18. 18 times 2 is 36, and 12 does go into 36. So we can use 36 as our common denominator. So how did we get to 36? I multiplied 18 by 2, so I'll multiply the 7 by 2 as well. That gives me 14. Let's do the second fraction there. What am I multiplying 12 by in order to get 36? I'm multiplying by 3. So I multiply 5 times 3 as well, and that gives me 15. Now we can add the numerators and keep the denominator. So this is going to be 29 over 36, and that is as simplified as it can be. All right, in this next one, we have 48 and 36 in the denominators. Now again, check the largest number and find multiples of 48 and see if 36 will also go into those multiples evenly. So 48 times 1 is 48. 36 will not go evenly into 48. You can try 48 times 2, which is 96. 36 also does not go into 96, but 48 times 3 gives you 144, and 36 does go evenly into 144. So let's go ahead and write that as our common denominator. We said that was 48 times 3, so I'm going to multiply 25 times 3 as well, so that's 75. Let's do the same with the second fraction here. So 36 times 4 gives me 144. So 5 times 4 is equal to 20. Subtracting, we have 55 over 144, and that's it. Okay, this last one has 3 fractions, so we're going to start with the same process. Take the largest denominator, which is 10, and I'm going to find multiples of 10 and see whether or not 5 and 6 will go evenly into that multiple. So we know 5 and 6 won't go into 10, so the next multiple is 10 times 2, which is 20. 5 goes into 20, but 6 does not. So we're going to have to move on to the next multiple. 10 times 3 is 30, and it looks like both 5 and 6 will go evenly into 30. So 30 is going to be our denominator. 5 times 6 gives us 30, so 1 times 6 is 6. That's our numerator. In the next one, we have 6 times 5 giving us 30, so 1 times 5 gives us 5 in this numerator. And then in this last one, we multiply by 3, and we have 10 times 3 equals 30, so 3 times 3 equals 9. So 6 plus 5 minus 9 is equal to 2. Keep the denominator, so we have 2 over 30, and that can be simplified down to 1 over 15. All right, now just as a reminder, the way that we change a mixed number to an improper fraction is we write this with the same denominator as the fractional portion of the mixed number. So this is going to have a denominator of 3. And then to find the numerator, we multiply 2 times 3, which is 6, and then we add the 1 here, so that would be 7. So this is equal to 7/3. So now when you're adding or subtracting mixed numbers, you want to change them into improper fractions and then add or subtract like you did before. So if you had unlike denominators, you're going to have to find a common denominator. If you already had common denominators, then you can go ahead and add or subtract the numerators and keep the denominator. All right, let's look at a couple more examples. So in this first one, we have 5½ plus 2⅓. So first, we're going to change them into improper fractions. So 5 times 2 is 10, plus 1 is 11, so this is going to be 11 over 2. The second one, we have 2 times 3 plus 1, so 6 plus 1, which is 7. And now you'll notice we have different denominators, so we're going to have to find a common denominator. In this case, that would be 6. Now, in order to have 6 as a common denominator, we multiply this first fraction by 3, so 11 times 3 gives me 33. In the second one, we did 3 times 2 to get 6, so 7 times 2 gives us 14. And now we have the common denominator, so now we can add these two fractions together, and that gives us 47 over 6, and that is as simplified as it can be. All right, let's look at this last one here. Again, we're going to need to rewrite these so that they are improper fractions. So 2 times 5 is 10, plus 1 is 11, so we have 11 over 5. In the second one, we have 1 times 4 plus 3, which is 7. So we have 11 fifths minus 7 fourths. We don't have the same denominator, so our next step is to get a common denominator. So take that larger one, which is 5, and find multiples of that. That 4 will also go into, so 5 times 2 is 10. 4 does not go into 10. 5 times 3 is 15. 4 does not go into 15. And 5 times 4 is equal to 20. And 4 does go evenly into 20. So 20 is going to be our common denominator here. And now we can get our numerators. 5 times 4 is equal to 20. So 11 times 4 is 44. In the second fraction, 4 times 5 is 20. So 7 times 5 is 35. We can now subtract because we have the same denominator. So 44 minus 35 is equal to 9. So this is going to be 9 over 20, and we cannot simplify that any further.